Hi, today we are talking podcasts and let's face it, beauty bloggers, fashion bloggers, anybody on YouTube, Instagram, they are all doing your own podcast. And what is podcast? Basically, it's like your own radio show. And the first thing you need to do is find a podcast host. And what is podcast host? It is the place that stores and distributes your podcast audio files. So, audio file, your show of the day. Say your show of the day is what is podcast hosting? And so that would be an audio file about you talking about the best sites to host your show. And they will give you your RSS feed, which is the listing of all your episodes. And from there, you submit that to Apple Podcasts and other podcast directories like Stitcher and Spotify and iHeartRadio. And they provide analytics, web players, scheduling tools, and other features to make publishing and growing your podcast super easy. And so how do you choose a podcast host? So some are for beginners, some are medium, enterprising customers. Just it depends on your level. Are you a semi-pro? Are you a professional? And I like, how much do you want to pay per month? Do you want it to be free? Do you want it to be medium or expensive? And what kind of services do you like? Audio quality, embedded players, analytics, storage options is huge. And how much time they'll give you per month to record. That's important. And so start with with just learning that you need a podcast hosting site. So that's the first thing you do before you can even, begin your podcast. And then determine what's your budget. How much does podcast hosting site cost? And they range anywhere from $5 a month to $50 a month. And pricing varies. Depends on how many episodes you produce and how many downloads you get. And different companies base pricing on megabytes, hours, downloads, and bandwidth. And let's see. Can you use a free podcast host? You can, but they don't recommend it. If it's a free service, it means you and your data is usually not the product. So when you look at Facebook, all the issues with data privacy, so there's many free podcast hosting platforms shutting down and your podcast along with them. So make sure you save your files and go with the paid service. And it's the biggest question is, why can't you just upload your audio files to your website? The files are massive compared to anything else you upload. A picture, but MP3 is huge. That means you start with having multiple people download or stream at the same time, which is common when you release new episodes. Your websites will easily struggle to keep up with that data. So you want to have a good experience for your podcast listeners. And so where should you publish your podcast? There's Spotify, there's iHeartRadio, there's Stitcher, Google Podcasts. So Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Apple are the big threes. And they are popular apps like Overcast and Castbox use Apple Podcasts as the source of their shows. So Overcast and Castbox are important. Now, the best podcast hosting platforms will have these steps, but we also recommend, your podcast directory guide. We recommend complementary services. Let's say web hosts. So once you have your web host, you want a place to send your listeners that you own. Some of the podcast hosting companies will provide basic free website, which is great. But if you want for more flexibility, go with your own web host for WordPress. Create your podcast website. Start a WordPress blog. I recommend a WordPress blog. And there's many web hosting companies like Bluehost for smaller, under 20,000 visits a month. Kinsta, Kinsta, it's for larger sites. And let's see, it's a risk. They have a risk-free 30-day money-back policy. Domain names, you want a domain name like the.com, and registered domain name. Namecheap will give you free Whois privacy when you purchase a domain name, so that's nice. Name.com, WordPress themes, second line themes, Studio Press, email and marketing, grow your podcast. You can let people know about new episodes, special offers, meetups, anything. ConvertKit as your email provider. And let's see, leveling and tagging. Auphonics is to compress and level your audio so you don't have it really loud and really soft parts. So Auphonics, AUPHONIC. Okay. Transcription is a service that does Google Docs style editor for transcripts, which is nice. Scribby is a transcription caption service that uses people to transcribe your audio and video. So Scribby, SCRIBIE. Podcast reviews, Chartable. I love Chartable. We'll show you your podcast ranking with a quick indication whether you're moving up or down. And they now include Podcadt, Stitcher, and Podcast Addict in addition to Apple Podcasts. So they're amazing. I really love them. You can choose to have a daily or weekly update email. And you can use their smart link features to track down how many downloads your podcast gets from specific links. Let's see. Podcast Simplified. You get some useful analytics. Podcadt. It's a similar service and gives you your rankings for Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. Podcast Player, Fusebox Podcast Player. They have their own player and can be embedded in your website. So, like there's WordPress and Fusebox, formerly known as Smart Podcast Player. Podcast distribution. After you get your hosting set up, you want to make sure you get listed on the top podcast directory so people can find and listen to your show. And the top podcast directories are Apple Podcasts, which was formerly iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and TuneIn. And let's see. There are some other places to get more listeners. Let's see. Let me see. iTunes, I told you, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Let's go over them. Stitcher, STITCHER, TuneIn, TUNEIN, TuneIn. Spreaker, SPREAKER, Google Play Music, Blueberry, BlueBerry, BLUBRRY, Digital Podcasts, iPodder, IPODDER, podcast.alltop. Okay. Additional podcasts, AUPHONIC, 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 YouTube, Facebook, SoundCloud. There's a lot. So I'll give you the top 10. So this will be continued part 2.